There's a moment that happens in almost every parent's life where they hear their own voice come out of their mouth and they freeze because it's not their voice. It's their mother's or their father's. The exact words, the exact tone they swore they'd never use. And in that moment, something most people don't understand about trauma becomes terrifyingly clear. Why do parents who were hurt as children sometimes go on to hurt their own children, even when they desperately don't want to? Not all of them, not even most of them, but often enough that researchers have spent decades trying to understand the mechanism behind it. The answer isn't simple or comfortable, but it might be one of the most important things you ever learn about your own family and your ability to change its patterns. One thing first, understanding why something happens is not the same as excusing it. A parent who hurts their child is responsible for that harm. Full stop. But responsibility and explanation are different things, and if we only talk about blame, we miss the mechanism that lets this pattern repeat. Understanding that mechanism is what gives people the power to stop it. A child's brain isn't a smaller version of an adult brain. It's an active construction site. Neural pathways are being built in real time, shaped by the environment the child is in. Researchers call this neuroplasticity, and in early childhood it's at its highest level ever. Every interaction is laying down wiring that brain will use for the rest of its life. A child raised in a stable environment learns a baseline. Threats are rare, adults are reliable, the world is survivable without constant vigilance. That becomes the operating system the brain defaults to for life. A child raised in chronic stress or abuse learns a different baseline. Threats are common, adults are unreliable or dangerous, safety has to be monitored constantly because it can disappear. This is called toxic stress, and it physically shapes the developing brain's architecture. The amygdala, which detects threat and triggers fear, becomes hyperactive in children raised this way, trained through repetition to expect danger and respond fast. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for impulse control and rational thought, often develops with reduced connectivity in these same children. The brain is building itself to prioritize fast threat response over careful reasoning, because in that environment, fast response was what kept the child safe. This isn't a flaw or weakness. It's the brain doing exactly what brains are designed to do: adapt to maximize survival. The tragedy is that an adaptation which helped a child survive often becomes a liability in adulthood, in relationships, and eventually in parenting. Here's where the pattern makes sense. An adult with a hyperactive threat detection system carries it into every stressful situation, including parenting. One of the most chronically stressful experiences a human can go through. A crying baby, a toddler's meltdown, a teenager's slammed door. Normal parts of raising kids. But for a parent wired in chronic threat as a child, these moments can trigger a disproportionate alarm response. The amygdala fires the same way it did in actual danger. The prefrontal cortex, already wired with reduced regulation, struggles to override that alarm with calm thinking. In that split second, before conscious thought catches up, the nervous system reacts the way it was trained to. Sometimes that's yelling, sometimes withdrawal, sometimes, tragically, it escalates further. The parent isn't coldly choosing to recreate their childhood. Their nervous system is responding the way it was built to, often faster than intention can intervene. This is intergenerational transmission of trauma. Not mystical, not destiny, neurobiology shaped by environment, repeating because the underlying wiring was never addressed. There's a second layer that makes the cycle harder to break. What we learn about parenting as children, long before we consciously choose what kind of parent to be. We absorb a template: how conflict gets resolved or doesn't, how emotions get handled or suppressed or weaponized. We learn below conscious awareness what normal looks like. A child who watches a parent regulate anger calmly learns that anger can be managed without harm. A child who watches anger explode unpredictably learns something very different. That anger is dangerous. Maybe that explosive anger is simply what anger does. These templates are stored not as explicit memories, but as automatic patterns. Many adults who repeat harmful behaviors report genuine shock in the moment they do it, because consciously they never wanted to. The template was installed long before conscious choice was part of the picture. This is why simply telling someone, "don't repeat what was done to you," is almost never enough. The pattern lives in deeper, faster systems that need a different kind of intervention to change. Here's something crucial, because without it, this starts to sound like an excuse, and that's not what the research supports. Most people who experience childhood trauma do not go on to abuse their own children. The pattern we've described is a significantly increased risk, not an inevitability. Many people carry this exact wiring and never harm their kids, so the real question becomes just as important. What's different about the people who break the cycle? The single strongest predictor of breaking it across multiple studies is what researchers call a coherent narrative. The person has processed and made sense of what happened to them, not suppressed it, not minimized it, actually looked at it directly, often in therapy, and built an understanding of what happened and how it affected them. People who can talk about their childhood with clarity and emotional regulation, rather than avoidance or overwhelm, show dramatically lower rates of repeating harmful patterns. This makes sense neurologically. Processing trauma helps integrate the automatic reactive parts of the brain with the slower reasoning parts. The amygdala doesn't stop firing entirely, but the prefrontal cortex gets better at stepping in fast enough to interrupt the automatic response before it becomes action. This is called affect regulation, and it can be built deliberately. A second major factor, underappreciated, the presence of at least one safe, stable relationship at any point in childhood, even outside the immediate family. A grandparent, a teacher, a coach. Researchers studying resilience have found that even one consistent, caring relationship can meaningfully alter a child's developmental trajectory, providing a counterexample to whatever pattern is dominant at home. This is the buffering effect. The damage isn't always total, and even one reliable source of safety can give a developing brain a second template to draw from. The third factor is conscious, deliberate self-awareness during parenting itself. People who break the cycle describe a specific practice: noticing the rising surge of reactivity in real time, naming it, deliberately pausing before responding. This is manually doing the job the prefrontal cortex would do automatically in someone without that trauma history. It's slower and more effortful, and it's hardest exactly when stress is highest. But research on parenting interventions shows that practicing this deliberate pause repeatedly over time actually begins to rewire the automatic response, not just manage it. What this tells us is genuinely important. Trauma isn't a curse passed down through blood. It's a pattern written into neural architecture by experience that can be rewritten by different experience. The brain shaped by chronic stress isn't fixed that way forever. Neuroplasticity, the same mechanism that made the child vulnerable, is also what allows adult brains to change, given the right conditions and enough deliberate work. This is also why access to mental health support matters at a societal level, beyond individual willpower. Trauma-focused therapy isn't a luxury. For someone trying to break this cycle, it functions as a structural intervention into a measurable biological pattern. People who can access that support and use it show meaningfully different outcomes. Not because they tried harder, but because they had access to the intervention that addresses the actual mechanism. So, back to that moment we opened with: the parent who hears their own parent's voice come out of their mouth and freezes in horror. That moment, painful as it is, matters for a specific reason. It means something noticed, the automatic pattern surfaced into conscious awareness instead of running undetected. And that moment of noticing, uncomfortable as it is the exact starting point. Every researcher studying this points to as the beginning of actually changing the pattern. The cycle isn't unbreakable. It's not destiny written into a family's blood. It's a pattern built by experience, sitting in pathways that can, with the right support and real deliberate effort, be rewritten. The parents who break it aren't necessarily the ones who had it easiest. Often, they're the ones who did the hardest, least visible work imaginable. looking directly at what happened to them, understanding it without excusing it, and choosing, moment by moment, to respond differently than they were taught to respond. That work doesn't undo what happened to them. Nothing does. But it changes what gets passed down next.